Welcome to The Explainer. So glad you're here. Today, we're diving into literally the most exclusive travel itinerary in the universe, the 2026 space tourism industry. We're going to separate all that sci-fi hype from the cold, hard reality of ticket prices, departure dates, and the actual vehicles being built right now. If you want to know what it really takes to leave Earth today, you are absolutely in the right place.
Think of me as your high-end travel agent today. We're going to unpack this whole industry piece by piece, starting with the two very different tiers of space travel: a massive shift in the suborbital market, a surprisingly accessible balloon alternative, the absolute race to replace the ISS, and finally, a huge plot twist from NASA.
Section 1. The two tiers of space, setting the baseline.
Okay, so to really understand what going to space means in 2026, we have to look at this fundamental divide. The market splits pretty cleanly into two tiers. First up is suborbital flight. This basically means taking a rocket or space plane up to about 100 kilometers, right to the edge of space, known as the Kármán line. You get a few awesome minutes of weightlessness, see the curve of the Earth, and come right back down. But then you have true orbital flight. This is the real deal, a sustained journey roughly 400 kilometers up. You're going fast enough to just continuously fall around the planet, staying up there for days or even weeks. It's a completely different engineering beast and honestly, a totally different price bracket.
All right, brace yourselves for the sticker shock here. $750,000. That's the baseline cost right now for a seat on Virgin Galactic. For that, you get a few days of training at Spaceport America, a runway takeoff, a massive rocket-powered climb, and, well, about 90 minutes door-to-door. Out of that, you only spend a handful of minutes actually floating. So yeah, that is a very, very expensive few minutes.
But wait, here's where the divide really hits. $55 million. That's roughly what an orbital ticket is going to run you with a company like Axiom Space. If you want a 10 to 14-day stay on the International Space Station, which requires months of intense training and riding a SpaceX Crew Dragon, this is the neighborhood you're shopping in. A suborbital hop takes serious wealth, sure, but true orbital spaceflight, that takes a completely different level of extreme, 8-figure wealth.
Section 2. The suborbital market shift, the drama in the stratosphere.
So back in early 2026, this more affordable six-figure tier, it experienced a massive earthquake. Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin made a really startling announcement. They just suddenly paused their New Shepard suborbital tourism flights, the exact same rockets that had been flying tourists since 2021. They paused them for at least 2 years. Why? Well, they wanted to pour all their resources into the Blue Moon lunar lander program for NASA. Basically, Bezos sacrificed immediate repeatable tourist ticket sales to focus on much deeper space lunar ambitions. And honestly, it left a huge vacuum in the market.
And how did the competition react? Well, Virgin Galactic's founder, Richard Branson, came right out and said it. Blue Origin seems to have bowed out of putting people into space. We need to fill that gap. With Blue Origin stepping out of the spotlight, the whole narrative tension of the industry just snapped. Overnight, Virgin Galactic found itself positioned as basically the sole major provider of commercial human suborbital flights in the near term. Let's actually break down Virgin Galactic's super aggressive comeback strategy here. Remember, they voluntarily grounded themselves back in mid-2024 to build their new, next-generation Delta-class ships. Well, now they're targeting a return to commercial service in Q4 of 2026, but the absolute wildest part is their frequency. They are aiming to launch these new ships every 48 hours. They bumped their fares up to that $750,000 mark we talked about, and they currently have a waitlist firmly capped at 700 eager ticket holders. I mean, if they actually pull this off, they're going to absolutely dominate the suborbital tourism space while Blue Origin is busy looking at the moon.
Section 3. The balloon alternative, near space on a budget. Now, what if you're priced out of a $750,000 rocket ride, but you still really want to see the curvature of the Earth? Well, a surprisingly accessible third option is popping up right now: stratospheric balloons. You've got companies like Worldview offering a seat for $50,000, Space Perspective at $125,000, and Halo Space targeting around $164,000. Now, let's be totally clear. These pressurized capsules don't cross the Kármán line, and you are definitely not experiencing weightlessness. But they do lift you 30 kilometers into the stratosphere for this gentle, multi-hour flight with luxury dining and massive panoramic windows. By dropping the price by almost an entire order of magnitude compared to rockets, these balloon ventures are radically opening up who can actually afford a near-space experience in the coming years.
Section 4. The race to replace ISS, the orbital hurdle.
All right, let's shift our focus way back up to that $55 million orbital tier, because right now it is facing a straight-up existential crisis. The hard truth, and really the biggest takeaway from this whole explainer, is that the bottleneck for orbital travel isn't rockets anymore. SpaceX and others have the rockets completely figured out. The real bottleneck is destinations. Think about it. Humanity's only outpost in space, the government-run International Space Station, is 25 years old. It's scheduled to be permanently retired and deorbited around 2030. If you want a booming space tourism industry, you kind of need a space hotel to actually go to, right? When the ISS inevitably burns up in the atmosphere, where exactly do the tourists go?
And that brings us to the competition. We've got 4 private stations in a dead sprint to become the next orbital destinations. First up is Vast Haven 1. They're going deliberately small, just a single module launching on a Falcon 9. But they are the closest to actually launching, targeting Q1 of 2027. Then you've got Axiom Station, which is the incumbent's play. They're already flying tourists to the ISS, and their big plan is to attach their own modules to the ISS first in 2027, and then detach to fly freely by around 2028. Next is Starlab, which is aiming to launch fully built on just a single SpaceX Starship flight around 2028. And finally, Orbital Reef, this massive business park concept from Blue Origin and Sierra Space, though, to be fair, their timeline has noticeably slowed down recently. But these are the contenders trying to build the orbital hotels of tomorrow.
Section 5. NASA's ignition plot twist, changing the rules. But right as these commercial companies were mapping out their grand private space stations, the government stepped right back in. In March 2026, NASA introduced this massive plot twist called ignition. See, for years, the plan was for NASA to just step back entirely and simply rent space on fully private stations. But under ignition, NASA decided that hands-off approach was just moving way too slowly to beat that 2030 ISS retirement clock. So they totally changed the rules. Now, NASA is going to build its own government-owned core module, and private companies will plug into the central government hub, rather than flying completely solo. It's a huge shift from a purely commercial vision to a much more hybrid government-private reality.
So, what does this actually look like for our calendar? Well, here is your ultimate travel itinerary for the next 4 years. In 2026, Virgin Galactic attempts its massive high-frequency return to suborbital flight. In 2027, the very first commercial station modules from VAST and Axiom target orbit. In 2028, Starlab goes for its huge single-launch deployment. And in 2030, the era of the International Space Station officially comes to an end. It's pretty wild. This industry is transforming at absolute breakneck speed.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question to chew on. As the ISS prepares to fall back to Earth by 2030, and these new hybrid commercial stations take its place, what is the actual on-the-ground reality of space tourism? With orbital tickets sitting at $55 million and suborbital trips at $750,000, will this new orbital frontier ever truly become an accessible travel category? Or are we simply shifting from a government-run scientific monopoly to a billionaire's private playground? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep looking up and keep asking questions.